On June 12, 2026, a man became the first trillionaire in the human species. His name is Elon Musk. After SpaceX went public, his fortune crossed $1,100 billion. Every major outlet on Earth ran the same headline: unprecedented, historic, never seen before. They were wrong, because 700 years ago, on a dusty road between West Africa and Mecca, there was a king almost nobody remembers, and by some serious historical estimates, he was already richer than Musk is today. Richer, possibly, than every billionaire alive right now, combined. His name was Mansa Musa, and before I show you how a 14th century African emperor might out-earn the entire Forbes list, hit that subscribe button, because we already did the video on the richest person alive. This is the one where we go back through every era of human history to find out who was actually, truly, the wealthiest human being who ever lived. And the answer is so much weirder than you think. Let's start with the man everyone's talking about right now. Elon Musk didn't get to $1 trillion by saving up. His fortune is built almost entirely on paper, stock in Tesla, and a massive stake in SpaceX, which just got valued at a level that pushed his net worth past anything ever recorded for a living person. A few $100 billion of that appeared in a single day, the moment SpaceX shares started trading. That's the strange thing about modern billionaire wealth. It isn't sitting in a vault. It's a number generated by multiplying shares owned by share price, and that number can swing by tens of billions before lunch. Larry Page, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bernard Arnault, every name near the top of that list is the same story. Wealth tied up in company stock, recalculated every time the market opens. So is Musk the richest person who has ever lived? By raw, nominal dollars, today, yes. Nobody has ever had a bigger number next to their name. But nominal dollars is doing a lot of work in that sentence. $1 trillion today is not the same thing as $1 trillion in 1990 or 1930 or 1320. If we actually want to crown the richest person in history, we have to adjust for inflation. And the moment we do that, the entire leaderboard gets rewritten. That's where things get interesting. Because for almost a century, there was one undisputed champion of inflation-adjusted wealth. An American oil baron so dominant that the U.S. government had to invent new laws just to break him up. John Davison Rockefeller started out as a 16-year-old bookkeeper in Cleveland, Ohio. By 1870, he had founded Standard Oil. By 1880, his company controlled roughly 90% of all oil refining in the United States. Not a market, the entire market. At his peak, around 1913, Rockefeller's personal fortune was somewhere between $900 million and $1.4 billion. That sounds almost cute next to Musk's trillion. But here's the trick. Simple inflation, the kind that compares the price of bread then to the price of bread now, only gets you to around $20 to $30 billion today. That number is technically correct and also completely misleading because it ignores just how enormous Rockefeller's fortune was relative to the entire economy he lived in. So economists use a different method for fortunes this size, called the GDP-share method. Instead of asking, what could his dollars buy, it asks, what percentage of the entire country's economic output did this one man personally control? Rockefeller's wealth, at its peak, equaled somewhere close to 2% of the entire United States GDP. Apply that same percentage to today's economy, and Rockefeller's fortune balloons to somewhere between $400 and $630 billion in today's terms. Same man, same peak year. Two wildly different answers, depending purely on the math you choose. And that single fact is the reason almost every richest person ever list you've seen online disagrees with every other one. They're not actually disagreeing about Rockefeller. They're using different rulers to measure him. For decades, using the GDP-share method, Rockefeller held the unofficial title of the richest person in American history, richer on paper than Gates, than Bezos, than anyone, right up until Elon Musk finally passed him back in 2021. But Rockefeller isn't even the strangest case on this list. Not even close. Because there's a man who ran an empire so wealthy that historians genuinely cannot put a number on him, and every time someone tries, the number gets bigger. Mansa Musa became the 9th ruler of the Mali Empire in 1312. At the time, Mali controlled territory across what's now Mali, Senegal, Niger, and Guinea, and underneath that territory sat an almost unfair amount of gold. Historians estimate that during Musa's reign, the Mali Empire was responsible for something close to half of all the gold circulating in the entire medieval world. Not half of Africa's gold, half of the world's. Salt mines, ivory, and control of the trans-Saharan trade routes added even more to the pile. Cities like Timbuktu, under his rule, became centers of trade, scholarship, and architecture that drew scholars from across the Islamic world. In 1324, Musa set out on his pilgrimage to Mecca. This wasn't a quiet trip. Historical accounts describe a caravan of tens of thousands of people, including thousands of enslaved attendants, with camels reportedly loaded down with gold dust by the ton. When the procession passed through Cairo, Musa spent $5 million and gave away 48,000, so much gold that he single-handedly crashed the local price of gold. According to accounts from Arab scholars at the time, the value of gold in Egypt dropped and stayed depressed for roughly a decade afterward. One man passing through on a religious pilgrimage didn't just spend money, he temporarily broke a regional economy. So what's his number? This is where it gets almost impossible to answer honestly. Several modern analyses, including ones built off detailed historical breakdowns, place Musa's inflation-adjusted net worth somewhere around $400 billion, which would already put him ahead of Rockefeller on most calculations. But other historians push back hard on even having a number at all, and Encyclopedia Britannica itself describes him simply as widely considered the wealthiest person in history, full stop, no asterisk. Why the disagreement? Because Musa's wealth wasn't sitting in a bank account or a stock portfolio. It was gold mines, farmland, trade routes, taxation rights, an entire kingdom's worth of physical and political power, all wrapped up in one person who also happened to be the head of state. You genuinely cannot put modern, audited numbers on something like that. Some estimates that try to capture the full scale of his economic control go far beyond 400 billion, into the trillions. Nobody can prove those higher numbers. Nobody can disprove them either. And once you accept that logic, that a ruler's personal wealth and his empire's wealth are basically the same thing, an entire new category of contenders shows up. One that makes even Mansa Musa look almost ordinary. Genghis Khan never hoarded personal treasure the way a Western tycoon would. He famously redistributed loot to his soldiers and commanders rather than keeping it. But the empire he built was, at its height, the largest contiguous land empire human beings have ever created, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. Some economists who've tried to value the total resources, territory, and trade networks under Mongol control have floated numbers in the tens of trillions of dollars. A few estimates go even further than that. Then there's Akbar I of the Mughal Empire, whose territory is estimated to have generated something like a quarter of the entire world's economic output during his reign. Emperor Shenzong of Song China presided over an economy that may have represented close to 30% of global GDP at the time. Augustus Perez effectively owned Egypt as a personal possession after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra, an entire nation's treasury functionally his. Here's the catch, and it's a big one. Most serious richest person in history rankings deliberately leave these names off the main list. Not because their wealth wasn't real, but because it's impossible to separate what the ruler personally owned from what the entire state owned. If a king's word was the law and the treasury was the kingdom, did he have $400 billion, or was he simply in charge of an economy that happened to be worth that much? Most economists will tell you that's not really a question about money anymore. It's a question about what personal wealth even means before nations had stock markets, currencies, and separate government budgets. Which brings us back to the actual question this video promised to answer. So who is the richest person who has ever lived? Here's the uncomfortable truth. There isn't one answer. There are three, and they don't agree with each other. If you're asking who has the most real, verifiable, audited dollars right now, today, it's Elon Musk at over $1 trillion. No historical figure has a number that's been priced by an actual stock market in real time the way his has. If you're asking who controlled the largest share of the world's economy using the method economists generally agree is the fairest way to compare wealth across centuries, most rankings still hand that title to John D. Rockefeller, whose fortune at its peak likely represents more buying power relative to his era than almost anyone in modern history. But if you're asking who came closest to holding wealth so vast it broke the world's ability to even measure it, the answer is almost certainly Mansa Musa. A man who casually wrecked Egypt's gold market on his way to a pilgrimage, who controlled half the world's gold supply from a kingdom most people today couldn't find on a map, and whose own contemporaries described his fortune as something that simply couldn't be written down in numbers. Maybe that's the real twist here. We built this entire video around a leaderboard, and the deeper you dig, the more it turns out the leaderboard itself doesn't really exist. Money, as we understand it, with prices and currencies and stock tickers, is only a few hundred years old. Before that, wealth and power were the same thing, owned by the same person, and you genuinely cannot put it on the same spreadsheet as Elon Musk's Tesla shares. So which one of these three is the real richest person ever? Honestly, that's not really for me to decide. Drop your pick in the comments and tell me which method you think is the fairest one. If this kind of deep dive is your thing, where we take one simple-sounding question and follow it all the way down the rabbit hole, make sure you're subscribed, because that's exactly what this channel does every single week. Hit the bell too so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.